will be analyzing the first poem in the National English O-Level Literature syllabus, To the Nile by John Keats. In this video, I will be doing a brief description about the poet, then I will be doing a small description about the poem, and then moving on to a line-by-line analysis on the poem. So let's proceed. First, we have our poet, John Keats. He was born in 1795 and died in 1821, aged 25. He was an English poet and he was very famous for writing odes, sonnets, and epics. He lived and wrote during the Romantic era of poetry, which was from the late 18th century to the early 19th century. This is more or less all you need to know about the poet, so let's move on to a brief description about the poem. Our poem, To the Nile, is a sonnet, which is a poem with 14 lines. To the Nile is wrote in the Petrarchan style of poetry, which means it has two parts, an octave and a sestet. The octave in this poem is its first 8 lines. Here we can see the poet being in complete awe of the Nile's mere existence. However, in the sestet, which is the last 6 lines of the poet comes out of his daydream and starts to realize the practical beauty and importance of the Nile. Now let's move on to the line-by-line analysis of the poem. First, we have our first 2 lines. Son of old moon mountains African, chief of pyramid and crocodile. Here the poet has personified the Nile as the son of the moon mountains and the chief of the pyramid and crocodile. The reason why the poet has personified this as the son of the mountains is because it starts from the mountains of Africa and flows down from them. And the poet has referred to Nile as the chief of the pyramid and crocodile, as the pyramids and the crocodiles exist in Egypt today because of the Nile. For example, the huge stone blocks that were used to build the pyramids were transported in boats along the river Nile, and the huge freshwater crocodiles that live in the Nile exist because of the Nile's water. Now let's move on to the next lines. We call thee fruitful, and that very while a desert fills our seeing's inward span. When we talk about Egypt or learn about the ancient Egyptian civilization, we normally get to know that the Nile is very fruitful and lush. However, when we just think about the Nile, what we imagine is a vast, barren desert landscape. This is what the poet shows in these 2 lines. The poet has showed imagination in the phrase seeing's inward span. Nurse of swart nation since the world began. Africa is often called the Dark Continent as it remained unexplored for quite a long time by the Europeans. And the Nile, which flows through this dark continent, has been a source of food, water, transport, and entertainment for nations along the banks of the Nile since the day it started flowing. And this is why the poet says that the Nile has been a nurse which nurtured these dark nations into what it is today since it began. Art thou so fruitful, or dost thou beguile such men to honour thee who worn with toil rest for space twixt Cairo and Deccan? Here the poet starts to question the Nile. However, the octave is not over yet. Here the poet asks the Nile if it's actually fruitful as we know it is, or if it just gives out an illusion or a picture of beauty that makes people want to respect and worship it. or if it is really actually lush and fruitful. Here, this could be a reference to the Nile's reputation as a god, or how it has been important, and how there are temples lining the banks of the Nile from the ancient Egyptian days. Let's move on to the next slide. Oh, may dark fancies err, they surely do. 'Tis ignorance that makes a barren waste. Here the octave ends and the sestet begins, as the poet starts to question the mythological beauty of the Nile and starts to see the actual practical beauty and importance of the Nile. Here the poet criticizes his habit of letting his imagination run amok and imagine desert landscapes because that makes him neglect the actual fruitfulness and beauty of the Nile. It is the ignorance of the people that leads them to believe that the Nile runs through a desert landscape when it is actually quite green and beautiful. Of all beyond itself, thou dost bedew green rushes like our rivers, and dost taste the pleasant sunrise. Green isles hast thou too, and to the sea pleasantly dost haste. Here we can see the poet realizing the actual beauty and greenery of the Nile. The poet compares the Nile to rivers in England and Europe, as he says, green rushes like our rivers, green isles hast thou too. This shows that the poet sees a similarity between himself and Africa, himself and the Nile. He lets go of his past beliefs of the Nile and how he thought it was a desert landscape, and he starts to truly believe how Nile is a fertile and fruitful river that has kept great civilizations alive for centuries. And that marks the end of the poem and its line by line analysis. If there are any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them in the comment section down below. And I will be coming back with the rest of the poems soon. Thank you.